At the last portage, when I'll pack no more, let me fly with the wild goose high over the North Shore, with the wild goose, high over the North Shore, and I'm going home.
Dear Kind's sons, David, Peter, Andrew, Stephen, and family members, Diva Marie, friends from all horizons, we're joyfully assembled here, just as Wayne would have wanted. Welcome to this celebration of life, to honor Wayne Loxley Kynes, a person, each and every one of us, in their own special way, grew to love and admire. I'm Benoit Charlebois, and I met Wayne when I was 19 years old. And in the spirit of how my relationship with my life mentor and guide began in 1987, when Wayne and I met for the first time at the Chateau Laurier here in Ottawa, as I spoke to 500 Rotarians, and Wayne was sitting in the back and came and reached out at the very end of my speech as I was going to fly off to South America, and he said, "Come and work with me this summer. I have things to teach you." And since then, my life, of course, has been waned. And I hope you'll accept and appreciate that I wish to give this important celebration a special name, because Wayne's journey was shaped by historic global gatherings, and that I may take liberties using my own brand of puns. Remember, I'm a French Canadian, I'm not that good at that, and poetry, as Wayne so enjoyed humorous and clever play on words. So, I would like to call this assembly the Waynology Summit, in celebration of a most unique branch of knowledge, also known as the science of community building through interconnectedness, Waynology. We're indeed in this physical and virtual space to pay tribute to the remarkable life of Wayne Loxley Kynes, a most exceptional being by all measures, and by some accounts, one of mankind's most phenomenally and formidably skilled and talented interconnectors. Each of us here celebrating Wayne's most extraordinary life, either present in this room or scattered around the world, and there are thousands and thousands, had a life before Wayne, except maybe for his offsprings. A life with Wayne, and since August 14th, have been experiencing an after Wayne life. Indeed, for better or for worse, whether as a result of a fleeting moment of serendipitous eye contact with those smiling eyes, or a lifelong relationship since childhood, like some of you here, each of our lives have been Waynified. In so many ways, our lives have forever been transformed, and as a result, I believe we're all intertwined in varying degrees. We're all connected by one giant Waynodex. Wayne's Rolodexes, of which this is a fine copy. We're all connected through common Waynestries, or Wayne's stories. The blessings of his Waynesdom, Wayne's wisdom, and a deep bond of, you'll guess, Wayneship. Today we will try to further uncover and deepen the mysteries of Waynology, and identify the benefits of spreading its teachings throughout our lives by hearing from individuals from only a few of Wayne's realms of activity and influence, remembering the Wayne who embodied them. As I mentioned, puns and poetry, please allow me, throughout the celebration, to sprinkle a few limericks I have clumsily written over the past few years to honor Wayne's Gaelic ancestry. So here goes with the first one. There once was a man born June 10th. His life spent searching for sense, skillfully seeking betterment, relying on silent discernment. He always found inspiration and strength. There once was a man called Wayne Kynes, who very much believed in spiritual signs. Every morning he listened and guidance petitioned. Such was how God inspired his designs. Today we gather to celebrate Wayne's being, with the certainty that his soul is evermore thriving. May fellow deceased welcome his jocularity, and our Lord grant him eternity, to accomplish in heaven what on earth was left hanging. I'd like to invite Reverend Ron McConnell, a long-standing family friend, to come and lead us in prayer.
I'm grateful to be able to share in this service today. I'm married to Wayne's niece, Michelle Kynes, and that's how I came to know Wayne. I would invite us now, each in our own way, to unite together in a moment of contemplation and prayer. So let us pray. Holy One, Spirit of life, Spirit of love, today we celebrate the life and acknowledge the death of one of your own, one of our own, a worker in your vineyard, a concerned citizen of the world, a passionate activist, communicator, and steward of creation. Most especially, Diva's beloved husband, and a very proud father, father-in-law and grandfather, the youngest and last of 4 special brothers, a dear uncle, cousin, friend, and man of faith, Wayne Loxley Kynes. Bless this day the words and memories that will be shared here. Bless, too, those who share them with us. Touch as well the silent thoughts of all our hearts. Especially, touch gently those thoughts and memories that remain, still too deep for words. May we who gather in person and online hold one another in our hearts and minds now, creating a circle of love and caring that will strengthen and sustain us and will light our way through this day and all the days to come. May it be so. Amen.
There once was a man called Wayne Kynes, with a passion for global themes of all kinds. He devoted his life to community in search of our shared humanity, ensuring godly guidance aligns. Now I'm pleased to be introducing my friend, Dr. Diva Marie Beck, a friend to all here, Wayne's 3rd wife and stepmother and step-grandmother to many of you here. With a number of friends, nursing leaders, and concerned citizens, Wayne and Diva co-founded the Nightingale Initiative for Global Health to inspire their worldwide outreach of caring for humanity and the earth. Diva has been most privileged to be with Wayne for some 18 plus years through many, many, many adventures, as you can well imagine. Diva?
Good morning. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I was laying awake this morning wondering what to say, and I'm going to start with what I thought I was going to end with. You know, each of us are threads in Wayne's life. And Wayne carefully carefully wove those threads into a fabric that is still with us. It's a thread of love, a fabric of love that we have. So I'm opening with that, but then I'd like to share with you 2 condensed stories. I was with Wayne a long time, and I know how to tell a long story. But I promise you these are condensed stories. 2 stories about how it is that I connected with Wayne and this fabric. The first was my midlife crisis, where I discovered that working in critical care in San Diego wasn't enough for me. I wanted to learn more about global civil society. I had been very impressed with the Earth Summit in Rio in '92, and little did I know that global civil society was greatly strengthened by some of you here and by Wayne at the '72 Stockholm Summit that we'll hear more about from Hero and Don da Silva. That I was just so taken with the global civil society that I knew was emerging that I changed my life and moved to the East Coast, first to Washington and then to Ottawa, to discover how to become a global citizen myself. And to be honest, I thought I was walking away from nursing. But then, and this is a much longer story, I'm telling you the short one. It happened that I was at the UN, and it happened that I was sitting in the coffee shop with friends to prepare for the United Nations Summit in Istanbul in '96. And Wayne came into the coffee shop. I'm not even sure why he was at the UN at the time. He walked into the coffee shop, sat down with us, and said, he heard that we had been invited to be in Istanbul. And he said, "Did you know that Florence Nightingale began her work in Istanbul?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." He said, "Yes, and you know what you should do? You should do an international tribute to Florence Nightingale at the barracks where she began her work." And so it happened. The lady organizing it faxed me 2 weeks later to confirm that the army base in Istanbul that was then called Scutari, where Nightingale literally looked after wounded and dying soldiers, was a place where we could have an event. And I was privileged 4 months later to be keynoting at that event. And with that, I learned what Nightingale was already doing for global civil society, literally paving the way for us and she and many others at that time, and literally paving the way for nurses to be part of global civil society. And then I realized that paving the way for nurses was part of my destiny. And that was when Wayne was only an acquaintance of mine. And so the destiny, and to learn later that Wayne had literally been part of the tiniest team of people emerging global civil society, the global to grassroots connections that we're still working on. So now I'm going to close with a prayer that I created for that summit and that place that I was inspired by my cousin Janet McGurk to write. I will close with this prayer. Today, our world needs healing and to be rekindled with love. Once, Florence Nightingale lit her beacon of lamplight to comfort the wounded, and her light has blazed a path of service across a century to us through her example and through the countless nurses and healers who have followed in her footsteps. Today, we celebrate the flame of Florence Nightingale's legacy. Let that same flame be rekindled to burn brightly in our hearts. Let us take up our own lanterns of caring, each in our own ways, to more brightly walk our paths of service to the world, to more clearly share our own noble purpose with each other. May human caring become the lantern for the 21st century. May we better learn to care for ourselves, for each other, and for all creation. And through our caring, may we be keepers of that flame, that our spirits may burn brightly to kindle the hearts of our children and our great-grandchildren as they too follow in these footsteps. Thank you again for all of you to be here. It means the world. It means the world. Thank you.
As Wayne turned 87 in 2022, we were reminded of his legacy of 72. At Stockholm 50 years ago, he listened to both UN and NGO, bridging divides by being the glue. Don De Silva was there with Wayne and has been a friend ever since. He's a former senior director of the United Nations Environment Program and a former director of the International Institute for Environment and Development. He currently works as a mentor and a Buddhist chaplain and mindfulness trainer at several universities in the UK. He will present evidence of Wayne's impact on the global environmental movement. From London, Don De Silva.
Deva Marie and the Kynes family, thank you very much for asking me to be here. The current Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said in 2019 that the older generation has let the world down. I'm not so sure about that, because I would like to present to you evidence of one of the persons from the older generation who made a global impact. I need to take you to 1969, when there was an explosion of interest about environmental issues, which led the then Secretary General U Thant from Burma to call for an Earth Summit, and this resolution was passed in the UN. And the task of organizing this in 1972, fell on the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, Philip Disen. But as with some situations within the UN, things don't go according to plan. And there were problems concerning the organization. And the Swedish government, of course, agreed to host it, but there was a possibility that it might not have been held. At that time, Wayne was working in Geneva at the Department for Economic and Social Information. And during one of his quiet times, he thought about recommending Maurice Strong to head the Secretariat. And this proposal from Wayne was taken up at the top level, and Maurice Strong was appointed as the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference. And his son, Ken Strong, is here. Stand up, please, Ken. And Strong turned the process around. In 1972, we had 5th of June, the beginning of the UN Conference on the Human Environment, and it was a historic occasion. At the conference, Wayne was the one who coordinated and organized the representation from the civil society, and I'm now speaking directly at young people in the audience. He led the way in enabling, and this was something somewhat unusual during the days gone by, to bring the civil society in to deliberations involving governments. But he did it, and it was a success. Now I'm going to read to you a short set of sentences from Maurice Strong's book, actually, to give you evidence that Wayne was the one who had this thought. In his book called Where on Earth Are We Going?, Maurice Strong says, a young Canadian friend, for Maurice, Wayne was always young, who was a media consultant to the UN at the time, arranged a meeting with dissent. I've heard this story told to me on several occasions. Maurice says, did I tell you about how Wayne got me into this environmental business? And then with Wayne, did I tell you about how Maurice Strong came into the UN system and saved us at Stockholm? So I've heard this 10 to 20 times. And I always say no when they ask me the questions, because I like to get it repeated again and again. Immediately after the historic UN conference in '72, which led to the establishment of the United Nations Environment Programme, the UN agency, the environmental conscience of the UN system, Wayne produced what he calls tabloids. And here is the first public document of the Earth Summit. This is in English, and this is in French. And these are the only copies available of that production. This kind of thing was not heard of in the UN. Normally, UN information bureaucrats are those who are government officials who get sent to being UN information officers, led out to pasture. But this was something unique, and this went around the world. Stockholm had a global impact. So that's interesting to ponder, because out of the thought and concern of one individual, you changed global policy. After this, of course, UNEP was established, and I was recruited to work with the Division of Communication under Wayne. And he put together a rather bizarre motley group of people. We were all media professionals, rather different from the UN information organization. They were called the Office of Public Information. Wayne used to call them the Office of Public Misinformation. But we did things there which were pioneering. And we produced professional material, brought together some 450 media outlets, blue chip newspapers, and media organizations, and disseminated information to them. And this was something which was not done in the United Nations system. The other thing which Wayne was very keen on was not to only put out material in the normal languages, the usual languages, English, French, and Spanish. He wanted, and he emphasized and encouraged us to make sure that the language was disseminated in Urdu, in Bahasa, in Punjabi, in Kiswahili, in Tagalog, and so on. And as a result, the environment movement through UNEP had an unprecedented global impact. And this was very important in laying down the foundations and stabilizing the work of the United Nations Environment Program, because there were many, including UN agencies, including governments who overtly supported the environmental cause, but they were planning to try and limit the impact of the organization. And there were even some faith organizations were very hesitant about UNEP. Why? Because they thought that the ecological process would challenge this concept of man's dominion on Earth. So Wayne and Morris together laid down the foundations to stabilize and to create a sustainable world. And if you despair at what's going on, what I would like you to think through is how one single individual can make a difference in the world. The world, humankind, owes Waynekind's a debt. There is no doubt, as far as I'm concerned, about that. This is something which I would like to really hit home, and have come all the way from England to be here to point out the impact that this Canadian has had on the world. Humankind has and owes a great debt to Wayne Loxley Kynes. And finally, I'd like to just say, in my tradition as a Buddhist chaplain now, as I am working in several universities in the UK, I would like to say goodbye by saying, Vaya Dhamma Sankara Appamadena Sampadetati. All conditions are subject to change. Strive diligently and sustainably. Thank you so much.
I call now on Hiro Shibuya to take the podium, who perhaps is definitely one of the oldest, if not the longest, professional colleagues and protégés of Wayne, going back to the early 70s, to give a few words.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Benoit. What has made Wayne an extraordinary person is that he had the innate capacity to communicate with and identify ordinary person in whom he saw potentiality to bring about the vision and idealism to work for a better world. I met him at first at UN headquarters. During the field trip, I was a graduate student then, and I was getting bored with listening to rather uninspiring, typical bureaucratic speakers giving lectures about the virtue of UN. And then suddenly, the last speaker, I was taken in by the sort of body language and disposition. He was sort of starting talking in my language. and talking to me. So I apparently asked a question. I don't even remember to this day what I asked him about. He liked my question, and his usual way, he didn't know me. He just invited me to come and visit his office the next day. I was 27 years old, graduate student, and UN official is inviting me to his office, so I was pretty impressed. So I went in there in a friendly Wayne's way, and he started talking about my boys and so forth. And he said, why don't you come over to my house? It was actually an apartment, a big apartment in Cape Bay. That's why I met all four of your boys here. That was 1969. Well, fate would have it. I went to Geneva as an intern to work for United Nations Student Association. And so we become neighbors. It's extraordinary to me. Ever since our first encounter, he had always taken a personal interest in me and what I was doing and my career, and even persuaded reluctant UN management to recruit me, young, sort of self-claimed radical activist, to take charge of one of his pet projects called Youth and Student Coalitions for Development, with the objective of creating greater interest among young people and mobilizing young people, therefore people, and interest in international cooperation and sustainable development. As a most creative, effective communicator on a subject of global sustainable development, he actually has preceded that tabloid. He conceived, created tabloid newspaper called Development Forum. You remember that? The first ever publication free from sort of bureaucratic constraints by United Nations. It's pretty revolutionary. It's first, I would say, a UN publication which hasn't gone through censorship by the member states. That's the genesis of all the tabloid he has published since. I was privileged to be a part of the team. And as you know, as Dan has elaborated, Wayne had collaborated, and Maurice Strong led what Dan has called genesis of global environmental movement. I just want to, I could go on talking 5 hours about what happened, but just to give you some anecdotal stories that I have gone through. I was serving as NGO liaison officer under Wayne at the Stockholm conference. Ostensibly, I was a radical student. There were about 2,000 to 3,000 radical students and young activists sort of camping out on what we call pig farm. And so we were trying to find a way of, or using the energy of young people to contribute. Actually, there was a fear those young people might disrupt the conferences. So we ended up, I don't know, I'm still wondering whether it was Wayne or Governor of Alaska, I can't name now. Come up with well, he was the guy fired by Nixon because he told Nixon to listen to young people when they were involved in anti-Vietnam activities. Make a long story short, we ended up helping young people to mount a sort of giant model of a whale marching downtown Stockholm. That actually led to the Morris, as a Secretary General, has permitted a draft resolution calling for the moratorium of hunting of whales. In fact, subsequently, 2 years later, International Whaling Commission has indeed impose 10-year moratorium on hunting of whales. That put me on a blacklist with my own government. Never. But another anecdote or story, which we are of interest to you, I'm the only person who spent overnight at the hotel room together with Margaret Mead, noted anthropologist, and Dame Barbara Ward Jackson, leading international development scholar. In fact, I was, of course, on behalf of Wayne, assisting them in drafting NGO resolution at the Stockholm conference. I could go on talking about this, but I just wanted to tell you personally, I cannot imagine how my life would have turned out without my relationship. And without him, I never would have joined the UN, had a career that followed. Without Wayne, I never would have married Marisha. And without Wayne, I would never have the life that I had. So as you can see, Wayne was more than just my mentor and friend. He, in fact, created the world in which I have lived in the last 5 years. And with God's blessing, I will still live today. I want to thank Diva and the boys for allowing me to share some anecdotal stories of my life with Wayne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hiro, for taking a few more minutes to tell us those stories, and many more, and many more. As we've heard, there once was a man called Wayne Kynes, who was an ace at writing inspiring lines, communicator by education, community builder by dedication. He wrote to expand our sight lines. Please welcome one of those individuals whose sight line was expanded during the environmental development days of the 70s, 90s, mid-80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Please welcome Anne Fouillard, an old friend of Wayne's from that world.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to share a little bit about what I encountered when I met Wayne. When we first met, when I came to work in Ottawa on environment and development issues, I was a recent graduate from the School for Resource and Environmental Studies of Dalhousie University. I was a young upstart, wannabe professional, and through a confluence of events, I ended up actually setting up a secretariat for CEDA on environment and development issues around 3 conferences, 2 of which I remember the names, and a third one which escapes me. One was the Fate of the Earth Conference, and the other one was the Brundtland Commission, which was the lead up to our common future. And this was back in the mid-'80s when those connections were being made. CEDA had never made the connection with environment up until that point, which was really quite interesting. And I think Wayne was recently arrived also in Ottawa, though I don't recall the details. Anyway, he knew everybody, and he made me feel at home. He gave me context and mentored me gently with his fabulous anecdotes. I mean, he had a story for absolutely everything. He was an inveterate storyteller. And he always provided context and historical continuum, whether it was the Stockholm Conference, the first one on the human environment, or his growing up years in Roblin. And at this international conference, 3 of the world's most influential women, 2 of which have been already mentioned, were Indira Gandhi, Margaret Mead, and Barbara Ward. And as you all know, Wayne was a lover of women. My God, he loved women. And he was just one of the most interesting people I'd ever met. I'd never met anybody who could actually position a story so aptly for absolutely every situation. The other thing we had in common, which was not my ability to storytell, was that we both were born in Manitoba. Well, that gave us a big sense of commonplace. He came from Roblin, and I came from an even smaller village called St. Lazare. So we both saw the world through this kind of funny urban, rural lens, and it gave us context. And what I loved so much about Wayne was his sense of humor. Irrepressible, right on the money, and totally absurd. I mean, the more absurd, the better. His work was entrepreneurial, like in a way that, in the UN, as Hiro Shibuya mentioned, and Mr. Da Silva, was totally out of the context of traditional UN norms. If there was a way to get things through in other ways, you did it. And he was always dreaming up new projects to make a world a better place, to make a living, whether it was Westman Media or his tabloid named Tribute, which came around the time of the conference, the Brundtland Conference. Anyway, I just think I was the luckiest person to have met Wayne. He became our friend, both my husband, John Duckworth, and I. So we were really good friends, and we stayed in contact for a long time, but in the last 15 years we hadn't seen him, largely because he went to Manitoba and I lived on the East Coast. So this is my story about Wayne.
The secret of this storyteller called Wayne was to always manage to explain, through inspiring stories and lore, how each of us could do more by inviting God to sustain. And now I welcome Richard and Roz Weeks, who will interpret May the Road Rise Up to Meet You. Wayne has known the Weeks family since the 60s, when Richard's father was working with the WHO in Geneva. He also appreciated the Irish connection through Richard's wife, Roz, who will accompany Richard on the piano. Richard is also a member of the choir at St. Matthew's Church in Ottawa, where Wayne himself used to sing.
May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall soft upon your fields. Until we meet again, my friend, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall soft upon your fields. Till we meet again, we meet again. May God hold you in his hand.
There once was a man listening to a loon. This is from Wayne's house, Wayne and Diva's house. This clock sings. Wild goose. There once was a man called Wayne Kynes, whose great wisdom flowed from his bloodlines. Historian by passion, guidance seeker by devotion, he prayed to liberate our confines. Please welcome Wayne's eldest son, David, who will proudly carry on Wayne's ways and spirit through this family tribute.
Thank you, Benoit, and thank you, everyone who came out today. Before there was Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok, there was Wayne Kynes. He was the connector, the ultimate connector, the connector of connectors, the Pope of connectors. It's a bit of an inside joke, but I think it works for everybody. Within minutes of meeting him for the first time, he had probably extracted from you your hometown, your vocation, your religion, and he'd quite possibly discovered you both knew someone in common. And if you didn't have someone you knew in common, he was going to give you the name of someone you absolutely had to meet. He was always making introductions. If he had $1 for every introduction he made, he'd be rich. But instead, he was rich in connections, in friends, in colleagues, and in family. Wayne connected everyone in this room, which is why we're all here. Connectedness, it gives purpose and meaning to our lives, and he pursued it relentlessly. And he wanted all of us to connect with others as well. I would dread telling him I was going on a business trip because he would immediately respond with, "You must look up so-and-so when you get there, and you must see this person, and you must meet that person." No matter where I was going, no matter how short the trip, he would know someone I just had to meet. And before I departed, he would follow up with a letter or a fax or an email with the person's details and some clippings. 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 Wayne was also a collector of ideas, and he had especially long scissors that were made just for cutting out those ideas from newspapers. These scissors followed us all over the world. The scissors were eventually replaced with a forward button in his email account, which made sharing a lot easier. But the collecting and the passion for sharing those ideas carried on to the end. He also had rows and rows of file folders, each with someone's name on them. Many of you are here. I've seen these names. And he would file a clipping about something that he thought you should absolutely find interesting, you had to read. And he would wait, sometimes years, until he saw you in person, then hand you that file folder. It could be a clipping about something he thought you should know more about or a cause that you could contribute to. That's because he was also a tireless, passionate recruiter. And you've heard some of those stories today. All of us have been recruited. And you had to beware when he got his sights set on you. We've all heard the term waylaid. Well, adding to the vocabulary from Benoit today, there's the term now I got from someone called Wayne-laid. And this longtime family friend who couldn't be with us today told me recently, describing how his career path was diverted to a more worthy cause, and he used that term, I was Wayne-laid. Wayne would hear about a project that needed help or an idea that needed developing, and he'd then be on the lookout for someone who would be a good fit. Then he'd comb through the hundreds and hundreds of cards in his Rolodex and pick up the phone or send an email. The Rolodex, and that's a very small version. It's almost like a travel portable version, because there was much bigger. My recollection is that they were much bigger. Was a constant in his life, and it followed our family, my 3 brothers who are here today, and Valerie, his first wife, and our late mom, across 3 continents, and then back and forth across Canada. The travels of the Rolodex continued with Jane, and then later Diva Marie. The Rolodex, the clippings, they followed him everywhere. And if you'd like to see them in person, you're welcome to join us at the storage locker in suburban Gatineau tomorrow morning for the final purge. The phone was another constant. Mr. Dingaling, someone called him, racking up thousands of dollars in long-distance bills per month, reaching out, before it was cool to say reaching out, to his vast global network on a ceaseless, determined quest, a quest to make the world a better place by connecting people and ideas. And it consumed him. So consumed that one day back in 1993, about a half dozen of us were gathered together, including Wayne, to watch the Toronto Blue Jays play in the World Series. It was Game 6, bottom of the ninth, and if the Jays didn't score, it was going to be a final and going to go to a final and deciding Game 7. Joe Carter hit his game-winning home run to win the championship. The players flooded the field, and there was a lot of cheering and pandemonium. After a few moments, Wayne wanted to know why the players were all over the field and why the game hadn't resumed. His mind was clearly somewhere else, in some parallel universe, thinking of someone he should be speaking with or connecting with. Or, quite possibly, he had fallen asleep. Quite more likely in some ways, despite the hullabaloo around him. He had a prodigious ability to fall asleep just about anywhere. It's a very useful skill, and it's been inherited by me, and it's caused some embarrassment, but also been very handy. There was a parallel universe Wayne lived in. He had a creative approach to managing money, and how he expected others to manage it, and how they expected them to spend it. Does he owe you money? Please enjoy the complimentary lunch after the service. He also sometimes had a very unique view of events. Recently, he told me he hadn't gotten a speeding ticket in 30 years. However, when Diva lovingly but persistently, gently reminded him that she'd been with him when he'd gotten a ticket less than 10 years ago, he continued to deny that he'd never been caught speeding in over 30 years. When pressed, he finally said, "That wasn't a speeding ticket, that was a trap." He was absolutely convinced, because the police officer waited for cars to pass through an area in which they were very likely to be speeding, that he wasn't speeding. This was his parallel universe. But that one-sided view of issues also applied to people, and with some notable exceptions, he usually saw only the good and the best in people. He would focus in on one nugget of your accomplishments, one little piece of information, however small, and exhort you to use that accomplishment, that skill, to try something new, to help someone else, or to help some new cause. Certainly his 4 sons are examples of that. He instilled in us the curiosity to try something new, take a trip, move to another country, make lots of connections, and help others make connections. Wayne Loxley Kynes, he was curious, charming, joyous, mischievous, a teacher, a preacher, and an inspiration, a lover of using all caps in emails, a man with a razor-sharp memory of names, places, and ideas, almost to the end, a man of faith who sought daily guidance from his Creator, but also someone who was not perfect. Some might say he was selectively principled, but then, who among us is perfect? To be human is to be flawed. No tribute seems complete without a quote, so I'll close with one from Sir Winston Churchill. Large principles, a good heart, high aims, and a firm faith all provide some charts and compass for life's voyages. Wayne Loxley Kynes, he left his hometown of Roblin, Manitoba, determined to chart a course that would make a difference. He wanted to add value to this planet. And, as the testimonies heard today make plain, mission accomplished. Thanks, Dad.
Whose stories contained many plot lines. Storyteller by profession, mentor by affection, he spoke to untangle our twines. There is no longer a man called Wayne Kynes. August 14th, he left our shorelines. Child of God by creation, friend of humanity by inspiration, he lived to throw us our own lifelines. Now we'll listen to a hymn entitled Side by Side, which I believe was sung the eve of August 14th, between Wayne, Diva Marie. That's it. In closing, I would like to leave you with a paraphrase of Wayne's last ever written email to me, which I've tweaked, because I believe it should be, to make it a message to us all as we end this special Wayneology Summit. Dear each of you, deeply missing your presence, queries, and articles of conversation. Sharing with you today has relieved, restored, renewed, and refreshed my sense of wholeness with you, each and all, as common cause in a challenging global community. May God bless you in response to every need. May Wayne rest in peace, and may we each feel stronger for having grown in his company.
Yes, let us join our hearts and minds once more, dear family and friends. Holy One, Spirit of life, Spirit of love, in your embrace and the embrace of this loving, caring community of family and friends who are gathered here and joining us from throughout the world, may we each and all find the comfort and courage, hope and faith we will need to take up our lives again. Especially, we pray with love in our hearts for Diva, for David and Terry, Peter and Vivica, Andrew and Rhonda, Stephen and Eva, and for Wayne's grandchildren, his cousins, nieces, and nephews, and his many close friends. Oh, we know that our lives will never be the same again. There is a Wayne-shaped hole in us and in our lives that only he could fill. So we ask now for the strength, wisdom, and grace we will need to go forward in a good way, carrying our memories, our joys and sorrows, our hurts and happiness, our gratitude and regrets, carrying as well our struggles with life and death, and carrying the deep, deep comfort in the knowledge that love never ends. May the burdens of our minds and the weight of grief in our hearts be lifted a little over time by your nurturing in us a spirit of thanksgiving, of compassion, of forgiveness, of understanding, of laughter, and loving kindness. O Spirit, commit us to working for justice and peace. Remind us to love the earth, its people, and life itself as fully as we are able. Remind us also to treasure our friends and families, even though we must bid them farewell. We celebrate the life Wayne Kynes lived among us, and now his soul is at rest with you. He is at peace. So may we also find our peace and rest in you. May it be so. Amen. For generations in Wayne's family, there's been a tradition when gathering together, especially at meal times, but at other times also, to break into the song of the McNeil family grace. McNeil and Kynes family roots run deep and are watered by the words and music of this grace that we will all sing together. But I'm going to invite at the family's request, the Kyneses and McNeil clan that are here today to come forward and join us up here. And they will lead us in the grace, which hopefully the words for it will appear there. And we'll just be singing the first verse. And here they all come now.
And we all, we got to do it this, in the tradition of our family, we all held hands before we sang.